Sure, Madam Chair, we do have TNC members, Josue from South Tucson, John Bernal, Kurt Lewick, Steve Shepard. And then we also have the two CAC officers, Tom McGovern and Carolyn Campbell online.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. With that, if you all had an opportunity to review the minutes of September 13th, I would entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes as distributed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. We are now on to RTA next plan development update.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, if you recall at the last meeting, we did report to you that the CAC is going through a couple exercises, and we wanted to start those exercises in a few minutes. But before we do that, Rick has a presentation just to kind of summarize where we've been, where we're at, where we're going, just for a refresher. So if you don't mind, Rick, go ahead, please.
You got it. I'll jump in and just kind of, this is catching up a little bit of background also as Farhad summarized kind of what we've been actively working on in conjunction with the CAC. So as a reminder, current status, the board had put out there that they want us operating on the amount that they had been given, 20-year revenue at the minimum projection amount of 2.34 billion. And then they're looking for a draft plan by their December meeting. So just as a reminder, that's the deadline we're all operating under. At their December meeting then, and as we've been explaining to the various committees, the board retains the choice to say, we want more work done, we like what we've got, or we want PEG to go forward and start beginning the public outreach. So all that's at their discretion, depending on how that gets turned in and what they want to do with that at that time. So our current status is, as you recall at the last meeting, we had unveiled the updated cost estimates across all the projects from the detailed work that we've been working with the jurisdictions on that. And it raised the cost for the new project aspect alone to approximately 1.48 million as it compares against the 1.12 billion dollar total. So we've got that. We know we're slightly over. As a follow-up to what was brought up at the last time, just mostly to connect dots, Sam, you had asked about the 22nd Street project and the deferred project, one of the estimates and the amounts on that. We did find a blow in the formula that's been corrected on that aspect of it, but that's in the deferred, not the new, but I want to circle back with this group for that. As of last Friday, Chairman McGovern had asked if all the CAC members would go through and do a two-part exercise, a prioritization effort and then a ranking effort. And we'll go over those results. That was what was mailed out to you and is going to be the gist of our discussion here. So he had extended the deadline to ensure that there was adequate participation in that. So that completed last Friday, and then we put the information together for you. And then the gist of this presentation and discussion is going to be primarily in the interest of getting feedback, input for the CAC consideration at their next meeting coming up on the 16th. As a recap on this, the prioritization portion was basically where the CAC members looked at it and kind of decided simply what's in under the $1.12 billion amount and what's out. So any amount of projects can be used to fill up that bucket. It's simply that kind of an easy of an effort on there. It's under the fiscally constrained portion, as it says there. And the order of the projects then, as you see on the sheet, and we'll go over more detail, was simply based on how many votes it got compared against the overall number of participants. So you have 17 folks voted for something out of the 20 participants that were involved in that got it in 85, and that ranked it higher than if it only got 4 or 5 votes. So that's how that one was done. The second part of the exercise was a ranking effort. So we draw a distinction between those two, and Chairman McGovern wanted to go through and make sure we have both pieces available at that. And that was for each of the members to go through and rank all 33 projects. So there can't be any omissions off of that. Every project is going to get a 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And then the order of those projects is determined based on a formulaic calculation based on same thing, the number of input that was received. And so it allowed it to apply that and then give us the ranking condition that we've got and that's been sent out. And so we have the results available for those discussions. Farhad, I can continue going through the rest of the presentation, or we could stop here.
Yes, please.
Just as a recap?
Refresher, kind
You
of
got it. We'll come
overview.
back to it, but as a reminder, the remaining plan elements are still under review by the CAC. So of course, the last several discussions and meetings, they've been going through and evaluating the various categories or the elements that are being worked on, including transit, safety, active transportation, and the environment. That's what's been identified, and that's what we're carrying so forward. The administrative services, debt service, business assistance, and so kind of catch all for all the administrative type of things that has not been changed through any of the discussions and remains as is, as we originally laid out. So as a refresher, the transit elements, as per the working groups and the TMC's framework, $510 million allocation split across these various sub-elements, covering the service, frequency, expansions, neighborhood circulator systems. The next one up is safety, which has a total amount of 150 million allocated across corridor bus pullouts, intersection safety, railroad technology, and then the 2 line item projects that have been identified. The active transportation, $90 million total, with 76 going to greenways, and then the allocated amounts going to the 2 line item roadway projects. And then the environment element at 30 million, covering the transportation wildlife linkages. So as I said, the CAC is still going through ongoing and active discussions on all of these as they fine tune the sub elements, the allocations, and the amounts on that. And then the debt service one that I mentioned, this one's remained unchanged with the breakouts as per originally established, and it has not been modified since that time. And it covers our administrative services, small business assistance, bonding, and debt service. And with that, we can bring up the results in the form of the spreadsheets. You have the packet in front of you, which includes both the results from the prioritization effort as well as the ranking effort. What's distinction between the two? The prioritization has 20 responses down in the left-hand corner, and then the ranking had 15 received. And the ranking also carries the 1 through 33 on there for the breakout. The other one just shows the allocation of votes. And at that time, Farhad, Madam Chair, I can ask or answer any questions, or we can begin the discussion on that.
Sam.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. Rick, you mentioned there was a bus in the estimate for 22nd Street.
Correct.
It's been corrected. What's the total cost of the deferred projects with the new cost estimate?
So taking into account the correction to that particular item, as well as at the most recent TIP subcommittee effort, the allocation that was identified for federal and HERF regional funds as a candidate was applied to First Avenue. So our revised total, the amount we've been carrying for the deferred projects was approximately 230 million. Our latest update is 238.5. So it went up about 8, and that's been folded into the framework for discussion so that that's accurate. So small, slight increase on that amount that incorporates both those actions that have been taken. You got it.
Any additional questions? And if I could, I think Tom is on, or Carolyn, someone from CAC, if additional comments, but then I think if I can ask someone from CAC to help me understand, does the CAC have a preference between which of these charts, or what how should we evaluate a recommendation if we would? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, we don't, because we haven't seen the results yet. We received them the same time you did. So it hasn't been discussed with the committee yet. You can see, though, just at a quick glance, that the results of the 2 exercises are somewhat, well, I would just say they're comparable, at least on the surface. And so, you know, just as a reminder, the reason that I wanted to do the ranking exercise was so that we would get an idea if further cuts were proposed by the committee and or work sorry, I have an unstable internet, so I'm not sure if I'll go in and out. But the ranking exercise was intended to allow us to work back and forth and be a starting point for analysis of projects that would need to be eliminated from the initial list.
Thank you. Tom, did you have any other comments about the CAC's work for the TMC as we begin this discussion?
Well, the information that was put up on the slides a few minutes ago from that Rick was showing you are reflective of the TMC proposal. As you know, the committee itself, the CAC, been looking at an alternative proposal that is what we're really working with now. And some of those numbers are different. Obviously, the biggest difference is the amount of transit that's proposed currently. And that would have a significant impact on because the other elements are relatively close to what the TMC proposal is, but the corridor projects would certainly be impacted by that large jump in the proposed funding for transit. So it's really kind of at the crux of these two exercises is trying to see as a committee what the impact of that kind of shifting of the allocation might produce, and our assessment of how acceptable that is, as well as whether we're able to deliver an overall corridor project list that is representative of the entire region. So I can answer specific questions, but they'll probably be just as obfuscated as that was.
I can't tell,
Carolyn's on there as
but I
well.
can't tell if anybody's got a question
No,
or have their
I'll
hand up.
let you know. if
Okay,
I see
thank you,
anything.
good.
So, Madam Chair, if I may add, so as part of the initial conversation with the CAC, there was a desire to get feedback, obviously, from the TMC. So that's the main reason that you have this on your packet today, to take a look at it and provide feedback. And we promised them that we were going to do that before the next meeting on Monday.
Comments, questions? Beth? Oh, I'm sorry, Beth and Paul. Go ahead.
So, Tom, you had indicated that, that you wanted, that the CAC, they did look at the regionality of the two recommendations. Does the CAC think that both of these proposed project lists took that into account? Please, Tom.
I'm sorry, but I missed the first part of that, Beth. I heard the question, but I didn't hear the preamble.
That you had commented that the CAC was looking at the regionality of these two proposed lists. So the CAC believes that that was taken into account with these project lists?
No, not at all.
Just
That's something that we have to examine. This was intended to be done kind of in a vacuum. That is without regard necessarily to regionality, if you will, but rather the value of the projects themselves, which ones should be left on the list, as well as kind of what the ranking overall, the importance of those projects might be. As I said, it's a starting point only for us, and we'll certainly take a look and see that, things like 12th Avenue was, highly selected by folks as being worthy project, and yet when it came to the ranking, it was in the bottom 4. So those are the kinds of discrepancies, I guess, between the two that we'll have to talk about, and it would be helpful, I think, for us to understand if the TMC has an alternative methodology that they would suggest for coming to the final list, if you will, the $1.1 billion list, either by ranking or identifying least important of the important projects that are on that list. Thanks.
Paul and then Curtis.
Yes.
Sorry, Curtis, give us 1 sec. I got Paul and you, okay? Thank you.
So I want to echo Beth's comment with regard to a concern over regionality. There seems to be a very specific concentration on these projects. And again, not just looking for at the Oro Valley projects alone, but looking at the ability for this to be able to pass the voters and being that large regional, in that large regional context that provides transportation improvements for everybody. I do have concern over this list. And of course, we have definite concern for Oro Valley on one of the lists not having any of the projects. We want to make sure that this is that we do have a good running chance with the constituents across the entire gamut to be able to get this thing to pass. On top of that, was there any consideration for moving things out of the named projects that weren't particularly focused on increasing overall vehicular mobility? Because looking at the named projects as a means of getting our cars to move quicker and more efficiently, less pollution, and looking at categoricals as maybe an alternative place to put some of these named projects that aren't very specific for, again, moving automobiles around the Tucson urban area. So that would be my question.
Tom, were you able to hear that question? I don't know, staff.
He's still there, but
Okay,
not able to respond.
okay. Does staff, do we need CIC for that, or was there any?
Oh, if you don't mind, let's come back to that.
Okay, when we find time, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. We'll park it right now. Curtis?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. My first question is a simple one for Tom or Carolyn. What is the, I'll call it the transit delta that we're talking about here? What's the disparity between this and the continuing discussions at the CAC for increased transit funding? Maybe Carolyn can answer. Tom can't hear me.
Oh, good. Carolyn,
Okay.
there you go. Thank you.
Sure. Your recommendation, the TMC's recommendation is 510 million, and the recommendation from the CAC is 690 million. And that's inclusive of that high capacity transit that was kind of being floated around, but didn't make either list. So that, and I think that Sam can tell you, is that a 70 million?
That's
I believe. Yeah, so minus that is the difference. So
Okay.
it's about 100 million.
A little 100, 130, something like that. Okay,
Right.
so that would chip away quite a few projects on either of these priority lists if we went that way, which is fine with me. Kind of spinning off of what Paul was discussing, I'm wondering if there were any criteria used in either of these ranking efforts by the CAC. And I empathize a little bit with the CAC because it's primarily a lay group and they're deeply involved in what I would consider a highly technical issue. So was just this kind of subjective seat of the pants in these ranking, or were there certain criteria used, and were the same criteria used in each of the tables?
Yeah, Carolyn, I can hear
Okay.
again finally. Yeah, Kurt, we actually told the CAC that they had full access still to all of the previous ranking work that had been done, over the past year or two. And that included information from TMC ranking, high, low, and medium priorities, the CAC's own ranking exercises from before, and then, of course, knowledge of whose jurisdiction each project lay in, and who was the sponsor of it. So all that was available, and all the participants were directed to that so that they could look at it in more of a holistic manner, or at least have as much data as possible.
Yeah, so it was on an individual basis and not facilitated. Is that right, Tom?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that there's obvious some discrepancies, and I think Paul was talking about this a bit too. There are some projects that are above the threshold on one list and very highly ranked on the other list. And I really don't see how the CAC or even the TMC is going to resolve those discrepancies to come up with a coherent rank order without having a face-to-face discussion on this. You're going to keep going around in circles. And so there may be some things that the Technical Management Committee, which has more technical expertise, can help the CAC with. Whether or not that's another joint session or something, I don't know. But as I mentioned earlier, I do have empathy for the CAC for grasping with, trying to grapple with extremely technical issues. So hopefully sometime during our meeting today, we can resolve how the TAC can help the CAC come up expeditiously what I'm calling a funding priority list. This isn't a project priority list, really, it's just funding priority. And depending upon what threshold we have, it's projects are in or projects are out on it. To come up with a plan is going to involve scheduling, resource allocation. The scheduling of projects could totally perturb, I guess is a good word, the project priorities. Because there may be a very high ranked project that we'd like to see get done soon, but just can't because there's 5 or more years of lead time on it. Quartero interchange would be an example. So in the meantime, some of the lower ranking projects might get built, and later on, if we have a funding shortfall, we've already built some projects that are off priority. So those are some of the things I think we need to address before any of this goes to the board. And maybe it's time, since we have a goal of December for the TAC and the CAC to meet and try to reach some resolution on this, because there's a huge disparity between the two charts, Tom. And then with that 130 million delta on transit, I really don't know how you're going to resolve this quickly without. You're going to have to chase your tail and catch it eventually. And I'm hoping that the TMC can somehow help you, Tom, on this. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you. Bill, give me 1 second. And Tom, were you able to hear Paul's question that he had a little while ago about the
Not entirely. I caught, I think, the gist of it, which was that it's not a very regional. That there may not be support for a list that completely excludes, jurisdictions, which obviously is the point I was trying to make at the beginning.
Did you have a specific question at the end of that? Yeah.
Sure. So Tom, as the CAC was deliberating on this, all projects are important. I mean, we have that list that was approved in July with the TMC, and we were all in agreement. Now we're dealing with the reality of what we can afford. Is there a means to be able, maybe on some of the projects that aren't the classic enhancement project, say modernization, project where it's more pedestrian focused. Is there a way to maybe put that into the categoricals instead?
Yeah,
And-
we have, Paul, we have talked about that. And I think at one point, some of the committee thought that that would actually allow all the projects to be built at some point, because we could shift a number of them over there. Without that technical input from you folks, though, I don't see the CAC being able to really recommend moving projects out. I think what the city did with La Cholla and what was the other one? Was a good example of maybe what some of those modernization projects might be capable of as far as alternative funding. But that would be something we would really rely on your input for.
Thank you. Thank you. Bill? I'm sorry.
If I may just piggyback on that quickly. So Paul, as you recall, we've been having those conversations with every entity, and we continue to update and ask them if they want to modify the scope. So that is an ongoing exercise. If anybody is willing and able to look at their projects in more detail and propose scope changes, that's been ongoing, and we look forward to that.
Thank you. Bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question for Tom again. You alluded a little bit earlier that you hadn't really looked at the regionality of the projects yet. At some point in time, we have to get to approvability by the electorate. At what point in time does the CAC begin to bring that in? And do we spend a lot of time trying to pick the most important projects without dealing with the approvability by the electorate? Or should we be bringing that in sooner?
Good question. As far as when I anticipate us examining the regionality immediately. I think being able to take both these lists and see, which, how the individual entities are being treated, depending on which projects are removed as well as kept. We actually had the opportunity to do that. I know while we were doing this exercise, because we could remove projects and look at, kind of toggle back and forth on the map to see just visually what it looked like over the whole region. So that's the kind of examination of the list that needs to happen probably at our next meeting.
And I'm not questioning anything you're doing, and I appreciate all the work that you and Carol are putting in, because this has got to be just an incredible process to be trying to go through with the CAC. But to me, if I were looking at prioritizing, I would say, which are the most important projects in order to get this approved at the ballot box? Yes, transportation is important, and yes, capacity is important, and all those kinds of things. But we had some issues at the last election where we had municipalities that felt somewhat disenfranchised, and at times we're saying, I don't even know if my residents should be willing to vote for this. And obviously, getting that political process into the discussion soon is important, because we certainly want unanimous support from all the electeds.
Thank you.
I fully agree with that. There's kind of a corollary to that as well, which is getting the board to approve it, which means that the individual jurisdictions have to feel at the highest levels that they're getting a fair shake out of this process. And obviously that's somewhat beyond what probably a CAC is capable of determining, but it's also the reason that we give the board and you a draft plan. That's exactly what it is, and it's in some cases, I keep saying a starting point, but from that perspective, in a way, it is.
And think before we leave, that's one of the things others have mentioned that we need to look at is what's our TikTok leading up to it? Do we let CAC, does it make sense for them to continue to meet? Do we reconvene the working group with CAC and the TMC? Do we have the full group? So we can, I think, be important to talk about that. But now Carolyn and then Terry online. Carolyn?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to reiterate what Chair McGovern had mentioned before, as you are looking at these lists and wondering what they are. I mean, these were all done on a very individual basis, and we haven't deliberated over this as a group yet. Hopefully that's obvious because we just finished them and you're the first to see them. Your question, all these questions about regionality in the ballot are really important. We just haven't done that yet. You know, this meeting is coming before our meeting. So just wanted to make sure you understand that. I think we're going to have a pretty lively meeting on Monday.
I'm guessing. Sorry that we can't make it.
For
Terry?
once.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Carolyn, did I cut you off or were you? You're done?
No, I'm done.
Good, thank you. Terry?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that Carolyn might have just answered a lot of my questions right there because, and I'm sorry that I'm joining late, but we had manager service awards. I thought it would be kind of bad form to have town manager service awards and not have the town manager there. So I apologize for getting here a little bit late. I know this is an important meeting. And so I missed about the first 20 or so minutes of this. And I wasn't really clear on what it was we were supposed to do with these two lists. You know, if you want feedback on them or what, but it sounds like even the CAC hasn't vetted what they've done individually as a group. So I don't know that there's a lot of point in us talking about providing our feedback on two lists that were done kind of on an individual basis and haven't been fully vetted by the group. So until they, you know, put eyes on it as an entire committee and talks about where the strengths and weaknesses of how things fell are, I don't know that there's a whole lot for us to do because they have some work to do on it. It sounds like from what I'm hearing from Tom and from Carolyn.
Terry, that's pretty much what we've been discussing. And I think
Okay.
the feedback that is coming from the group is a concern about regionality and asking the CAC to look at that. And it sounds like from Tom and Carolyn, that's exactly the question that they will be addressing too when they reconvene. So
Okay.
what makes sense, I think from staff and Tom and Carolyn is this the kind of feedback, which is just, we look forward to hearing from you when you can convene as a group and actually have your own deliberations about this, as I say, or is it helpful to have the working group convene? And I'll go to Paul. I'm sorry, Tom.
Madam, I may, I'll start and then hopefully others can chime in. So as you recall, we did have a TMC approved framework, which was fiscally constrained, matched the revenue estimates. The plan that was approved by the CAC, there's going to be a tax increase. So, and that was roughly about $290 million assumption of additional revenue, which the board later came back and reaffirmed that that is not the direction the board wants to go. Additional tax increase is not an option. So really where we're at currently is two different plans, one with the assumption of a tax increase. So what I recommend to do is, at least for this committee, to go back to your framework that you approved back in July, take a look at that and see if we can bring that back into balance as well, because of the additional cost estimates. Now, even that plan is not fiscally balanced anymore. So my recommendation would be for the TMC working group to meet again. Let's bring that plan back to balance. So at least we have a list of projects that are fiscally constrained and the entire plan that is fiscally constrained. So I think that should be step number one. We'll be happy to facilitate dates and schedule another
Let's see what we
working
need to-
group if that's the direction we want to go.
Good, thank you. And I'm sorry, I had Paul then Beth. Oh, I beg your, I'm sorry, Tom, I left you out of that loop. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Madam Chair. I just would ask a question of the TMC, and that is, do you see value in either of these exercises, or both, or neither? My concern about how disparate they are leads me to wonder whether that process is something that you would embrace one or the other of those exercises as a way to start your ranking process, or to start to determine which projects would need to be eliminated. So that was what I had hoped for today, was to learn from you whether the process that we've undertaken makes sense to you, or if there's a different road that you would go down in order to determine that priority.
Get back to that. I've got Paul, Beth, and then back to Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, I think what I'm doing is expanding on what Tom just said. I can't speak for the other jurisdictions, but I can speak for myself that the rankings that the CAC put our two projects on were actually reversed to what we feel as a municipality are the importance. I would have flipped the two. I would have put Shannon first and Lambert second. The CAC, I think, was looking for out of this meeting for that guidance. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm wondering if it's worthwhile for all the jurisdictions just to go back and look at your projects, rank them from top to bottom. So that gives the CAC some type of framework so that they're not just having to pick the projects out of thin air, and they understand that there's some technical backing behind it as to what's more important than following down the line.
So if you recall, that was done recently and they have that information. So
Okay.
especially with the jurisdictions with only one or two projects, hopefully they are able to recognize that which one we prioritize as well, but they have that information.
Yeah, and that was not represented on this list, so that's why.
It's on that framework.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
So in it, Tom, one of the other things that at least I would like to recommend, in addition to looking at the regionality of the program and what is going to bring voters out to vote, and Curtis touched on this briefly too, is deliverability. That in addition to the deferred projects, there's also still a number of projects that will still need to be completed that aren't deferred from the existing RTA, and what jurisdictions have those projects, and those really need to be delivered first, because otherwise we're still sweeping all the regional money until those projects are done, which hurts everybody in the region from doing any other projects. So kind of taking a look at that list of what still has to be done in the first year RTA and making sure that those are planned to be delivered sooner rather than later, and then looking at what those remaining projects maybe should be, because those jurisdictions should be really focused on delivering that first RTA list and letting kind of everybody else have a bite at the apple and delivering additional projects. Because if we don't deliver projects, then we're never going to keep the voter keep them happy. So
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, Madam Chair. Beth, that's really good. I don't think that it's something that the CAC is really immediately capable of, but it would be terrific feedback from any lists that we do come up with, so that as a list is put together and presented to you, you can put the deliverability lens on it and tell us whether it makes sense or not, how it might need to be revamped slightly or dramatically in order to have things fall where they need to. The last thing I would want is to promise 25 projects to the public and then not deliver a single one of them for 6 or 8 years. Just as a clarification though, perhaps Farhad, on these RTA one projects, would there actually be any RTA next funds used on those projects to complete them?
Be happy to. Again, as you recall, we're setting aside $230 million of RTA next dollars currently as part of this exercise. So yes, the answer is that would be RTA dollars. But we are going through a separate exercise on the PAG side of the business. We hope that at least one project would be funded with federal dollars. So that helps with that balance that we were just talking about earlier. That project is a First Avenue project, roughly $10 million of federal dollars. So that'll help with that balance that Rick was mentioning early on. But the balance of them would be all RTA next at this point.
Yeah, the question was really whether RTA next funds can be used for RTA one projects, not the deferred projects, which in my mind become RTA two or RTA next. But what I understood from Beth's comments were the possibility that cash flow would be such that all the money would be kind of commingled. That is money that exists currently from RTA one, and as of 2026 is the end of that tax. And then as more funds are coming in from RTA next, would all of that then be used for would any of that be used for any of those projects that were simply in the fourth 5-year period?
Madam Chair, if I may, it might help to paraphrase, I think, what Beth was discussing. So currently what is happening is that we're utilizing other non-RTA regional dollars to supplement current RTA projects. And I think the concern is that if those projects are not delivered, there's going to be a continuous reliance on non-RTA dollars for delivery of those projects. The hope is to deliver those projects as soon as possible, and then we're able to roll into RTA next projects. Having said all that, ultimately what the RTA plan has to accomplish is to identify what projects are authorized to use RTA dollars from the plan. So if there's any overlap between the current plan and the next plan, that overlap will be identified in the RTA plan to allow authorized essentially use of RTA dollars. Anything that's in the current plan is already authorized. So every single penny in the current RTA plan will be authorized to be spent on the current plan. But if there's an overlap, that needs to be identified in the next plan as well.
I've got Jason and then back to Terry.
Madam Chair, I think our next meeting should be a working group meeting as opposed to, having the two different parties, going back and forth. I think that would be more productive. And then as far as the tribe is concerned, I think that our project, Camino de Oeste, is mostly focused regarding a safety element. Whenever the black wash flows, it shuts down Camino de Oeste, and the reservation is completely isolated. And we would entertain the thought of just scaling back our project so that at least that portion where it crosses the black wash is constructed. I mean, that's our main priority right now to make it all weather accessible. So I would entertain scaling back our project, and I think the estimate we have for just that portion of work is around 14 mil. So that would take about 10 mil off of what we have on the project. So.
Thank you. But that's the kind of work, you're right, that we're going to need to roll up sleeves. Terry?
Madam Chair, thank you. So to Tom's question that he asked a little bit ago about the process that they went through and whether that process we found helpful. From my feedback, Tom, I'm not really sure exactly what was trying to be accomplished with those two lists and that exercise. I don't know, you asked the question whether or not we would find doing a similar exercise would be helpful. And honestly, I don't see where it would be, because I'm not in a position, quite frankly, to rank the priority of the city of Tucson or rank the priorities of the projects in Oro Valley or Sahuarita. And I think to Paul's point, there was a ranking that was done by the CAC where they put projects that are in the town of Marana in a different priority than what we believe is the priority for our community. So I think that those things have to be considered in all this. And the jurisdictions need to be able to have some flexibility and say, no, these here are the priorities for us. We know the traffic patterns. We are listening to the voices of our community, and we know what is the priority. And it's not for me to tell the city of Tucson, Prince Road is a higher priority than Fort Lowell Road or some other thing. So I'm not sure what we would gain by doing an exercise like that. But neither here nor there. I think the other point that I wanted to make dealt with what Beth said, and Beth made an outstanding point about projects being delivered. And I don't know how many, Farhad, maybe you can speak to this, how many projects from the RTA 1 we've had that have not yet been delivered, and are they going to be delivered by the end of RTA 1? Do we have quite a few or not too many?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Again, as you know, we have the 4 that have been identified.
Yeah, aside from those, and I understand those, but do we have other
those,
undelivered? What's that?
Yeah, aside from those, we have a few projects that are final phases of projects that have already started. So there's roughly about 9 final phases that need to be completed. And then I believe there's 3 projects that are in the last period that have not started, and those 3 need to start. By statute, there's a requirement to make sure at least a phase of those projects start. So our focus would be to make sure that at least those 3 projects start between now and end of fiscal year 26. And then those phases, if there is an overlap of phases of projects, those are the ones that I mentioned earlier that we would have to identify what phases have to continue beyond 2026. And again, kind of goes back to Beth's question. We are going through that exercise. We're trying to identify other regional funds outside of RTA to complete those projects beyond 2026 as well. So that exercise is ongoing, and we can give you that information hopefully within the next 6 months.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've got Bill and then John Bernal.
Tom, you had asked before about comments on your process, and was it helpful? I think that it was. While I was talking before about regionality and approvability of the ballot box, the CAC theoretically represents the public. It's not a technical group. It's a broad community-based group. And getting the idea of what they think are the highest priority projects to meet the future traffic demands in Pima County, I think that's important. I think that was a really good place to start. And so I think we carry what you've done forward as we get into these other discussions. I do agree with Terry. I don't know that it makes sense for TAC to do another one of these because it's not going to match. I do think that maybe the next step, I mean, having a CAC meeting and have them look at this and digest it. But I think getting together and having a joint meeting probably is the next best step, at which case we can talk about the technical issues, we can talk about the community issues, we can talk about the regionality issues. But I do find what you did very helpful, and I realize that you have to start someplace, and I think it was a good place to start.
John?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I also, Tom, wanted to react to the process, and quite simply, I tend to favor the ranking approach, but with maybe one condition that ought to be imposed, if you will, on the CAC, and that's that the individual jurisdictions ought to have their own priority, absolute priority in the submittal. And then the CAC list would have to respect that. If they picked one from Oro Valley, it would be their highest, et cetera. So I think that's one refinement that could be made, and the other reason I like the ranking process is the logic you expressed earlier, Tom, that depending on the final dollar amount allocated to corridor projects, you're going to want to know whether you add or subtract projects based on this ranking. So, and by the way, that really does lead me to that, I guess, subsequent question about where we are with the program allocations. I realize the corridor project estimates went up substantially. Now, is all of that then being taken away from the other programs, or what's happening in that regard?
Thank you, Anthony.
I'll attempt to answer that again, John, as you recall, the framework and the discussion that took place at the board level and then at the TMC identified dollar amounts for those buckets. Those have not changed yet from TMC's perspective. CAC, as I mentioned earlier, CAC is discussing those buckets, and that's an ongoing discussion. But the latest we had from the CAC assumed that tax increase. So the numbers that they have do not match the numbers that the TMC has. So that's another topic that still needs to be discussed. That, in my opinion, going back to the half-cent sales tax revenue, and then now make any adjustments needed to the buckets to make sure that matches the fiscal constraint as well.
Beth?
So Tom, the other thing that I don't think that CAC looked at that I think really does need to be looked at as well is that a lot of projects are bringing a lot of non-RTA funding to the table. Like I'll use the SR 210 project as an example, that they're really only asking for $25 million of RTA funding, but we would get a $200 million project. And for every RTA project, there's all the signage that this project brought to you by the RTA, that people aren't going to associate the SR 210 project with ADOT, they're going to associate it with RTA. And that RTA delivered this project, and they're going to associate $200 million of project with really $25 million of RTA funding. So I think that those things have to be considered as well, like the Tangerine Road, the TI there. I mean, that they're asking for $57 million out of almost $160 million worth of funding. That the bang for the buck that you're getting for delivering those projects, that should probably be considered as well.
Thank you, Beth. So I think I'm just looking at our agenda item and seeing where we need to be, which the topic of this was to get some update from CAC. I think we've walked through that and seen where some of the, what Tom and Carolyn and others have commented on. And I think, Tom, you've gotten some feedback from the TMC, I think, about direction, concerns, feasibility, regionality, et cetera. A part of our concern today is then what we have our list that TMC developed last July. Does it need to be reworked, and how does that need to be worked? And is it, I think what we've all been chatting about is, what does that next joint meeting look like, if you will? Is that the working group? Is it both bodies? But what do we need to do as the TMC to refine our list? Because first of all, we've heard those numbers have changed. And, do we do that and then bring them together, or do we do that as part of a conversation with the CAC? John, I'm sorry, Curtis.
Related to that, Jan, I think one of the things that will help with prioritization is some visualization, basically to have these projects on a map for us, the ones that lend themselves to mapping. I think that will help address some of the jurisdictional questions and so on. And particularly when you've got two different priority lists with projects in different places and so on. So I've asked, if staff could prepare that for both the CAC and for the TMC. And related to the resolution of the list, is that what we are going to give to the RTA board by December? Are we simply giving them a prioritized funding list, or is the RTA board expecting something more that's like a plan? In other words, something that was in the publicity pamphlet for the 2006 election, basically a spreadsheet that showed the projects, the scheduling, the funding, and so on. So if December is just a priority, not a priority list, but a project funding list, I think that's pretty easy to do. But if we're looking for something more detailed, it's going to be a huge struggle for December. So that's just my question, I guess, for Tom, Jan, and Farhad.
Yeah, Madam Chair, two parts to that question. So the first part, the portal that CAC is using has all the information. They have mapping capability. They're able to pull up those maps and identify jurisdictional sponsorships and all that good stuff. We're actually getting ready to provide that for the TMC as well. Again, that was part of the discussion for today. If the TMC wanted to go through the exercise, I'm hearing there's probably no benefit for TMC to go through that exercise, but we can provide the portal for TMC so you kind of see all the information that's available as well.
Thank you.
Second part to the question, RTA board wants a full draft plan by December. That was the direction we received. And we are hoping that we're working towards that goal by December.
So, okay. So related to that, Jan and Farhad, is Rick or somebody there looking at the resource allocation scheduling issue that I mentioned earlier? Because, you know, some of the projects are going to be impossible to build before period 3 of RTA Next, for example, and some of them are the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
So, yeah, is somebody working on that? Because that, you know, that's a task in itself.
Madam Chair, so that's been an ongoing discussion as part of discussions with individual entities. We are going to finalize that and identify which projects are going to make it to the list. And once we know which projects are actually on the list, which ones are going to be committed to what period it's required to identify the 4 periods and which projects are going to be ready for construction during that period. And that's the extent of the language that we need to identify. Project X will be ready in period 2 for construction, and those periods are in 5-year increments. So that's an ongoing discussion. We're going to ask all of our entities to continue to have that conversation with our team and provide their take initially. And once we have their take, then the rest of the committees can kind of look at it as well.
Good, great. Thank you, Farhad. Are you also going to be looking at bonding? Because I got a hunch that if you're going to want to build the 4 deferred projects quickly, that's going to be a major bonding effort in order to do that.
Yeah.
How does that relate to the bonding availability for other projects?
So my recommendation to the board for the 4 deferred projects was to identify, making sure that they're all in the first 5-year period. And once the plan is approved, obviously we can use the projected revenue and we will have the bonding capacity to bond for those 4 projects almost immediately. And our hope, as Beth said, was to deliver those as soon as possible.
Thank you, Farhad.
So we're at the, I'm sorry, Beth.
I'm sorry, I just want to, something that Farhad just said, a clarification, that the list that we, I guess, the final list is the intent to go through the exercise to determine which period they would be delivered in before we even take this kind of tentative list to the public? Or would we take it to the public first, get buy-in on like what that final list should be, and then prioritize it?
Ideally, we want to have the first stab at what you all believe as the sponsor for the project, when you think you can deliver that project, plug it in in the draft plan, and then there's opportunities to make adjustments in the draft plan. But that information has to be discussed, so both TMC and CAC have that initial information. Adjustments can be made before it's finalized. I think you touched on it. There's capacity discussion that needs to take place as well. Who has capacity to deliver how many projects in each period? But that's a TMC discussion to have, and then slide those projects out as needed.
So I think it sounds like, first of all, there's some additional work with the TMC, right? Just to refine our projects, make sure what we've gotten to look at that bucket and go over our list again. Is it possible that we're doing a little bit of that work when the CAC has another meeting to see what they're doing and finalize and understand if they're doing any of the feasibility or regionality with these lists? If we can get perhaps instead of 2 lists or recommendations from the CAC 1, and then do we see if we can crosswalk those, or what's the?
My recommendation is to have the working group meet again and really drill deep to answer these questions, provide feedback to the CAC. as you all mentioned earlier, I think CAC is really interested to have your feedback. And I think that'll be the most productive approach, to have the working group provide that feedback, and then CAC can continue to work on their list as well.
Paul, then Carmine.
Madam Chair, I was actually going to ask that question, if it would be beneficial to get the working group back together, because what I'm thinking about is many of the projects should be multi-jurisdictional. So to go through a value engineering process to try to throttle the numbers down, we all need to sit in the same room together. There might be a Oro Valley Pima County piece where Pima County might say, okay, well, you can pull that piece back, and that might take and help decrease, the cost of an individual project. But we can't do that in a vacuum.
You got it. Thank you. Carmine.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think getting the ad hoc working group together is important, and not to say the CAC shouldn't continue their discussion that's scheduled for this coming Monday. I think that's important as well. One of the asks that I have, and maybe it's for Tom or Carolyn, there are CAC committee members on that ad hoc working group, and I don't think we had uniform attendance from those individuals. And I think we're at a critical stage where it would be important to have each of those representatives attend the ad hoc working group meeting. And I would just ask whether that membership, the CAC membership individuals need to be revisited or revalidated. I mean, is that the group that's most representative of the CAC, and will they participate? I think is an important question.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, good. So I think, I think the action we're really looking at today is the need to convene the joint working group, right, soon.
So Madam Chair, we'll go ahead and send out an email, coordinate, thinking hopefully no later than 2 weeks out. So we'll coordinate calendars, make sure the TMC working group members are able to attend. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask to set aside at least 3 hours. So we'll hopefully get something done during the working group meeting.
Anything else from this group?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Karen.
this is Carolyn.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, I think that Carmine asked, the question, should we redirect, get the current members of the ad hoc to commit to going to meetings, because it hasn't been super regular in terms of people being able to show up, or should we revisit it? And I think we should have a few more people. I think we could do both. See if people are still committed and interested and able to come. But I think it would be better to have a couple, 2 or 3 more people on it, just to be, just so we have that kind of representation.
Madam Chair, we'll reach out. We'll reach out to those members and make sure that they're able to attend as well. And that goes back to scheduling, to make sure we schedule it when they're able to attend.
Thank you. The agenda is RTA next plan development update. Any other discussion, clarification, progress? Anybody online? Nothing. Okay, got it. Future agenda items. Approval of the plan. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, thank you all. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you don't mind, next Wednesday or the following Wednesday, we'll try to